Due to the recent Middle East war, the US has depleted many air defense missiles, which is now impacting Korea too. Because strategic supplies from US Forces Korea have also been redeployed to the Middle East, the military strength of US Forces Korea has weakened. It has been confirmed that the US military is currently pressuring defense companies to expand their weapons production. According to a report by the Washington Post, the US military has ordered defense companies to submit plans to improve delivery speed and expand production of key military assets by the 21st. These key assets include air defense weapons. The US military is pushing hard because it depleted many key assets during the Middle East war. In the first month after the outbreak of the Middle East war, the US fired over 850 Tomahawk cruise missiles and more than 1,000 Patriot and THAAD missiles. They also used more than 1,300 ATACMS missiles. As a result, the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated that by the end of July, the US stockpile of Patriot interceptor missiles had dropped below 827, and the stockpile of THAAD interceptor missiles had decreased to around 2,278. Where is this from? It's not data released by some unknown research facility, but by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of the most prominent think tanks in the US, so it's a trustworthy statistic. Right now, only about 20% of the THAAD missiles remain. It's understood that the Patriot missiles are at just around 35%. The problem is that production isn't keeping up with the rate at which those assets are being used up. In fact, American manufacturing has been significantly weakened. Some people often think of American manufacturing during World War II and say that the US can quickly replenish its production, but World War II was already 80 years ago. The United States has changed significantly over time. In peacetime, the US produces up to 200 Tomahawk missiles annually. But just in 1 month of this war, over 850 missiles were used. Also, the annual production of Patriot air defense missiles is about 600, but more than 1,000 were used this time. As a result, the US government is pushing to boost production. Of course, since it's the US, there's a lot of money. The budget is more than enough. The problem is the pace of production. It's estimated that it will take more than 3 years just to restore the inventory that's already gone. We're looking at over 3 years. Even if they build factories, it's not something that can be done overnight. In fact, during this war, Iran has often shown that it is intentionally trying to deplete America's air defense missiles. It got to the point where Ukraine was even giving advice to the US, saying they shouldn't waste air defense missiles like that. Here's their strategy. First, they send many drones. By doing this, the US ended up firing air defense missiles at the drones. Drones are indeed very powerful weapons, but since air defense missiles are extremely expensive, even though the drones were intercepted, the US ended up at a loss. And when air defense missiles are launched, their positions are revealed, so Iran kept making the US use up its air defense missiles and then used its own ballistic missiles to attack key US facilities. This strategy actually worked quite well. Due to the high number of air defense missiles fired, there was a missile shortage, leading the US to redeploy supplies from other countries to the Middle East. Of course, I'm not saying that Iran didn't suffer any damage at all, but the shortage of US air defense missiles could eventually lead to other problems. Tom Caraco, a senior fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, called the situation a major warning about the generational erosion of conventional deterrence capabilities. This means the depletion of the US military's air defense stockpile isn't just a temporary issue, but a major factor that could impact China's and Russia's national decision-making for years. With the Middle East conflict escalating and demand for interceptor missiles rising, the US is indefinitely delaying promised weapon deliveries to European and Asian allies, including South Korea and Japan. They've started withdrawing large numbers of air defense assets and Tomahawk cruise missiles from key bases in Asia and Europe to urgently redeploy them to the Middle East. You might say that this is a lie or propaganda from a media outlet with a particular political bias. In reality, on the Ukrainian front, the supply of Western air defense missiles has almost completely stopped, and they are unable to defend against Russian bombings and missile attacks, resulting in devastating losses. Additionally, the Tomahawk missiles meant for Taiwan's defense have been moved to the Middle East, carrying important implications. The weakening of the military power of US forces stationed in Asia, including US forces in Korea, gives China, which is eyeing an invasion of Taiwan, a critical opportunity for miscalculation. There is a great risk that the Chinese leadership will see the current situation, where the US is bogged down in the Middle East, and even its air defense weapons to protect its allies are depleted, as the perfect timing to shake up the security landscape of Northeast Asia. Recently, there was also a large-scale purge of military leaders in China who opposed a cross-strait war, so there is one thing we need to point out here. If the US redeploys its air defense weapons to the Middle East, does that mean South Korea's air defense network will completely collapse? To give you the conclusion first, that's not the case. The South Korean military has set up a multi-layered air defense system against North Korea's ballistic missiles, aircraft, and cruise missiles. The Patriot and Cheonggung-2 are in use, and work is underway to deploy the L-SAM to intercept North Korea's ballistic missiles at higher altitudes. Therefore, even if some of the US forces Korea's air defense assets are withdrawn, South Korea's air defense capability will not disappear. However, the important thing is that the air defense systems of South Korea and the United States do not operate separately from each other. This is because the air defense assets of the South Korean military, the Patriot systems of the US forces Korea, and assets like THAAD are operated together, creating a structure that enhances the overall defense capability of the Korean peninsula. If US assets are pulled out, the South Korean military will have more areas and responsibilities to manage on its own. If North Korea deploys ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drones simultaneously, the air defense network would face even more targets. If US forces Korea sends air defense assets to the Middle East, South Korea will need to use more of its own air defense forces. Prolonged deployments could also make managing interceptor missile inventories a key concern. South Korea should focus on more than just the US withdrawing air defense assets in this situation. If the redeployment of US forces becomes prolonged, a key issue will be how much of the air defense responsibilities previously handled by the US on the Korean peninsula can be managed independently by the South Korean military. It is clear that the South Korean military's air defense capabilities have developed to a considerable level, but when looking at the entire ROC-US combined air defense network, there is definitely a possibility that changes in US forces could affect South Korea's security. Of course, we should also listen to President Trump's position. According to current foreign media reports, there are ongoing claims about a shortage of air defense missiles. After these reports, President Trump became furious and ordered a full investigation into leaks of military secrets and a review of ammunition stockpiles. The White House said the current US military response is sufficient and warned that government leaks will be strictly punished under federal law. President Trump reportedly expressed strong dissatisfaction, saying these reports expose US military weaknesses, could hurt its position in Iran nuclear talks and Middle East dominance, and might provoke Iran. In that situation, what followed was pressure from the US Department of Defense on defense companies, and because of the shortage of air defense missiles, the US also decided to take action. Currently, the US government and the defense industry have already begun significantly expanding the production capacity of major interceptor missiles. Lockheed Martin is pushing forward with a plan to expand its air defense missile production capacity from about 600 missiles per year to around 2,000 per year. That's more than tripling the production volume. This is why the United States is expanding both production facilities and the supply chain to tackle the current ammunition shortage. An increase in THAAD interceptor missile production is also being pursued. The existing annual production capacity was about 96 units, but there are plans to expand this to 400 units per year. Both the Patriot missile and THAAD play important roles in the United States ballistic missile defense, so expanding production capacity could have a significant impact on rebuilding America's air defense network in the future. However, one key issue remains. Announcing a plan to expand production doesn't mean missiles will quickly fill America's ammunition depots. To expand production facilities, new equipment must be installed and the necessary workforce must be secured. The production capacity of companies supplying various parts and materials that make up missiles also needs to increase together. There will be a significant delay between when the United States starts increasing production and when inventories actually recover. From the US perspective, what is needed now is to quickly replenish the interceptor missiles that are currently in short supply. However, the effects of expanded production may not fully appear until later. Even if annual production rises from 600 to 2,000 missiles, expanding production facilities will still take time. The same applies to THAAD, so while US production expansion is important, it won't quickly resolve the inventory shortage on its own. That's because there's a time gap between the missiles needed now and the missiles that will be produced in a few years. The United States is pressuring defense companies to speed up production expansion as much as possible. However, the problem is that if it takes the United States several years to secure enough air defense missiles again, during that time, China and Russia may decide to test America's ability to respond. The United States currently lacks time, not money.